And India has set the record straight as US President Donald Trump makes bold claims saying that India has halted the purchase of Russian oil and called it a good step. India has hit back with facts. There is no pause, there is no pressure, just policy. Top government sources have told this to NDTV, reaffirming the nation's energy strategy. Russian oil imports continue, driven by market forces, not foreign influence.
Our ties with any country, or all the ties that we have with various countries, they stand on their own merit, and they should not be seen from the prism of a third country. As far as India-Russia relations are concerned, we have a steady and time-tested partnership. The sourcing of our energy needs, we are guided by what is available in the markets and by prevailing global circumstances. We have a strong defense and energy partnership with the United States, which has been strengthened in the last several years. And there is a potential for this partnership to grow further under the India-US Compact for the 21st century. When I talked about India-US relationship, on the specific question of energy, you are well aware of our position. What is our approach towards sourcing our energy requirements? It is based on what is there on offer in the markets as also on the prevailing global situation.
Well, I understand India no longer is going to be buying oil from Russia. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's a good step. We'll see what happens, okay?
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he called on citizens to adopt the spirit of swadeshi and support made in India products. Listen in to what the Prime Minister had to say.
जब हम आर्थिक प्रगति की बात कर रहे हैं तो मैं आपका ध्यान वैश्विक हालातों पर भी ले जाना चाहता हूं। आज दुनिया की अर्थव्यवस्था कई आशंकाओं से गुजर रही है। अस्थिरता का माहौल है। ऐसे में दुनिया के देश अपने अपने हितों पर फोकस कर रहे हैं। भारत भी दुनिया की तीसरी सबसे बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था बनने जा रहा है। अब हम कुछ भी खरीदें तो एक ही तराजू होना चाहिए। हम उन चीजों को खरीदेंगे जिसे बनाने में किसी न किसी भारतीय का पसीना बहा है।
All right, my colleague Mohammad Ghazali joins us to get us more on this. Ghazali, the MEA, it reiterates that India and Russia relations are market-driven. India and US are committed to better the ties between each other. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, he has called for local and swadeshi. How do we look at these statements? And give us the context here.
See, the government of India is now sending out clear indication, a message to United States as well, that the relations between India and Russia can't be sacrificed at the altar of US politics. Mr. Trump has been pressurizing India to bow down to the terms and conditions put by the Trump administration to not engage with Iran, to not engage with Russia. But India has clarified time and again that despite facing all these Trump's tariffs and threats of sanctions on companies, India will continue to prioritize what are its own energy needs, and it will diversify its needs. It's not just Russia with whom India is engaging with. There are multiple countries, but India has clarified that it will be India's choice to engage with what country they want to, and the government of India has also clarified and has refuted all these claims that they have stopped procuring oil or crude from Russia. It continues to do so. India's refiners are purchasing oil from Russia, but a strong message sent by the Prime Minister himself when he stressed upon Make in India, when he said that now we'll have to be reliant on our own home production on whatever. It's just not the energy needs, because back in 2019 in his first administration, the Trump administration had forced India to sort of snap ties with Iran, to not get oil from Iran, and India actually brought it down to zero. But with Russia, the situation is different. It's been like 6 years to that particular incident. But right now, amid all these threats of sanctions and tariffs, India continues to procure oil from Russia.
All right, Mohammad Ghazali, thank you very much for getting us all those details. In fact, US President Donald Trump's statements has raised a lot of questions. We'll try and decode some of those questions. We'll try and find answers to some of those questions. I'm currently joined by Mr. Fred Weir, a senior journalist from Moscow, Dr. Brahma Chilani, a strategic affairs expert, Dr. Richard Benkin, commentator and author, and Mr. Harsh Pant, Vice President of ORF. Mr. Fred Weir, I'd like to start by asking you, how important is the Indian market for Russia's oil exports, especially in the current geopolitical context, and how do you look at Donald Trump's statements here?
Well, it is awfully important. Russia is financing its state budget to a large degree by oil exports, which go mainly to India and China. So if India were to cut it off, Russia might have a hard time replacing that market. And I think that is the logic that Trump is employing, since he's run out of, the United States and the West have run out of ways to sanction Russia. If you look at the announcement Trump made when he said he's going to sanction Russia, he's going to put new sanctions on, he sounded so dubious. Like, I don't know if it has any effect. I don't think Putin cares. And he's right. Russia has been largely unaffected. Certainly in the consumer economy, which I inhabit, there's hardly any impact of sanctions on Russia. So this would be a very effective way, I guess, by cutting off external oil sales for Russia. I think that would hurt, and that's the source of, you can't see much logic in a lot of things Trump does and threatens, but in this case, he knows where he's aiming.
Right. Dr. Richard Benkin, how do you assess the balance that India is trying to strike between its Western partners, and especially in this particular case, the United States, and its traditional allies like Russia? How do you see that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think your Prime Minister made an excellent point when he said that in the world today, countries are pursuing their own individual interests, and that, of course, means that India will do the same. Now, if you take that statement and add to it what the MEA said about the relationship with Russia being market-driven, what that does indicate to me is that, in fact, if it's market-driven, there is room for negotiation. This is not a red line. This is not something that India is going to have to keep, even to its own detriment. And we know that there are very extensive and complex negotiations going on right now on a US-India trade deal. I'll also mention that the fact that President Trump mentioned this, and in fact, he didn't say that India was not buying Russian oil. He said, well, I heard they're going to stop buying Russian oil, which does indicate that might be something going on in negotiations. In the end, India and the United States are both going to have to make decisions that are in the best interest of their populations. And I am absolutely convinced that they will come to an agreement, because they have to, because the US-India relationship is perhaps one of the most consequential of the 21st century.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And Dr. Brahma Chilani, what I want to understand from you is when Mr. Donald Trump makes such statements where he says that India has halted Russian oil imports, how do you interpret this particular claim? And what exactly might be his political motive in making such a statement? Dr. Brahma Chilani, I think you are on mute, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yes, please go ahead.
What Trump wants is that India should ditch Russian oil and switch to American oil. The US is already a major exporter of oil and petroleum products to India, and India's energy strategy calls for diversification. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Yep.
So even though American oil and petroleum exports to India are growing, India is a huge market. India is one of the largest importers of oil and petroleum products in the world. and Russia very much fits into this larger pattern of diversification. There's a lot of misinformation because I heard Rubio yesterday talk about Russian oil being sanctioned, and earlier the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also spoke about Russian oil that is sanctioned. Russian oil is not sanctioned by the US. Iranian oil exports are sanctioned by the US. On Russian oil, there is a G7 price cap. A price cap to ensure that Russia exports oil at a price below what the G7 has capped at. So when we talk about sanctioned oil, we are basically talking about something that doesn't exist. Russian oil is not sanctioned, and in fact, it was not placed under sanctions by the Biden administration deliberately so that the global oil price does not shoot up. So given that reality, India is very much within its rights to keep buying Russian oil. India has stopped buying Iranian oil long ago. The moment the Americans put sanctions on Iran, it's a virtual embargo that Trump imposed in his first term. So even though Iran is almost next door to India and has traditionally been a major oil supplier to India, India cut off all its energy links with Iran. But Russian oil has been flowing to India largely because it's not under sanctions. And I think this misinformation, in fact, it's deliberate disinformation to justify the weaponization of tariffs by Trump. Because when something is not under sanctions, any country can legitimately buy that country's oil, which is what India has been doing. And if India doesn't buy Russian oil, China will buy Russian oil even in larger quantities. We should not forget that the US sanctions on Iranian oil exports have failed largely because of China. China has become almost an exclusive buyer of Iranian oil, and it has been defying American sanctions with impunity. It's already a major buyer of Russian oil and gas, but if India were to stop buying Russian oil, China would be eager.
It largely doesn't really affect Russia in that particular context. That is absolutely correct, sir. Mr. Harshpant, what I want to understand from you is, does India's clear rebuttal in any sort of way indicate that there is a shift toward more assertive public diplomacy, especially in global affairs? How do you look at it, sir?
No, I think India has been, relatively subtle in its engagement on this issue because I think, as was pointed out earlier, this is an important relationship for India. It would like to ensure that the negotiations that are going on are not derailed. But at the same time, India has to make it very clear that negotiations can't happen under duress. India will negotiate a trade deal with the US as an equal, and I think that's what is being reflected in India's statements. What is also interesting is this idea that somehow India, one fine day, Donald Trump talks about Russia, and the other day there are reports that India is reducing its supplies from Russia. I don't think the markets work that way. But certainly, I think by and large, the argument would be that for India, India-Russia relationship remains a very crucial one. But at the same time, as India looks forward to strengthening and having a partnership with the US, which is a partnership for the 21st century, how is it that India can preserve its equities? And in that context, the argument that the Prime Minister has made today that, look, India needs to strengthen its own economy, India needs to strengthen its capabilities, and India needs, therefore, to have a firewall between what the external world wants us to do and what we are capable and willing to do. And I think that's what is going to be most important. So what we have seen is that India's response has been subtle, it has been straightforward, and it has been categorical in that sense that our relations with Russia remain alive to newer possibilities, even as our relations with America remain important. But Trump, the way he is conducting diplomacy and through public means may derail that prospect because that entails the space for maneuver that any government would want to have when you are dealing on such an important topic and when you are trying to conclude such an important deal.
I would like to take that point to Dr. Benkin. Could this move potentially strain India-US relationship, especially given that the Trump administration's emphasis is on curbing Russian revenues?
No, I don't. I think the leaders of both countries, in particular President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, are very skilled at pushing the interests of their own nations and at being good, strong negotiators. And I think this is really part of it. I know someone, for instance, recently mentioned China, that if India reduces its purchase of Russian oil, that China would fill the gap for Russia. Well, I think, again, we have to look at this within a wider context, because while these trade negotiations are going on with the US and India, there are also at the same time US-China trade negotiations going on. So there's a whole bunch of things that can go that can get thrown in there. The other thing to always keep in mind is, from day one, President Trump has bet on one thing, that the enormous US consumer market is too big a plum for any nation to ignore. Now, having said that, when you talk about nations like India, for instance, important nations like India, there could be a lot of different ways that takes form. I think someone mentioned, for instance, less Russian purchase of Russian oil, more US oil being purchased, perhaps at a reduced rate to make up for the Russian purchase. So there's just a whole lot of negotiation. I don't see it as a strain. I see part of a large negotiation, and I don't see it as anything out of keeping with how negotiations normally go.
Dr. Brahmachalani, a very quick word from you, sir. With the Prime Minister now invoking Swadeshi, in fact, we've heard him speaking about it on multiple occasions. When he invokes Swadeshi alongside the continued Russian imports, how do you look at it? Is India attempting to decouple national economic messaging here from strategic global partnerships? How do you assess that?
India is seeking to advance its economic and strategic interests by building robust partnerships with all the key players in the world. Russia is clearly one important player, but America is definitely an even more important partner for India. So the US-India relationship is critical to India's long-term economic and security interests, and there is a larger convergence of American and Indian interests in relation to broader Asian security, even though in India's own immediate neighborhood, US and Indian interests have become increasingly divergent, especially in relation to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, three immediate neighbors of India. The Americans and Indians are clearly not on the same page. But I think what is happening under Trump is something very fundamental. Trump is reshaping America's sanction strategy. He is doing it by weaponizing tariffs and globalizing their use. No US administration has ever attempted to do something like this. And he's increasingly sidelining traditional sanctions tools in favor of tariffs. Tariffs have become his preferred instrument for advancing not just US economic interests, but also geopolitical objectives. This is apparent from the trade negotiations between the US and India. The kind of trade deal the US was trying to push with India had key geopolitical objectives that the US sought to advance. In fact, what the US is seeking to do is to crimp India's independent foreign policy approach by binding India more closely to the US in various ways, through expanded purchases of American energy and weapons, by granting the US unfettered access to the vast and fast-growing Indian market. The Indian market is a giant market, but it's the fastest-growing market in the world. So in a sense, Trump is asking India to move closer to the US. But independence has been the leitmotif of Indian foreign policy under successive governments. That will not change. So India will seek to carefully balance its different relationships in the world.
All right. Dr. Brahmachalani and Harshman, thank you very much for speaking with NDTV. Whether it is a case of arm twisting by the US president or not, we don't really know.